My name is Marian Villa, and today I'm here to talk about design system in GF Mexico. This talk, we are going to talk about token actives, components, and patterns. Before starting, it's important to introduce myself. I'm a full stack product designer at NodeSource, and this means that I have knowledge of designing, product, and a master degree in marketing. This means I have some skills in the technical area, and from the human and social sciences, there is an interconnection through the designing interface and interaction with engineer equipments in the user experience. So this is our agenda. First of all, I will share a little bit of introduction to NodeSource. We are going to talk about design system baselines, component, tokens, patterns, and finally, why do we need to have like a design system architecture? NodeSource is a company, basically the company that they distribute Node.js binaries, and that's one of the functions, and another in general to create a product called InSolid. So large companies can monitor infrastructures. This can be used for companies around the world as enterprise, and this year we'll launch a SaaS version of NSource. Something funny about that is maybe you have already downloaded a GS for a server, and you will realize that without knowing you have used our service. Another important point, what we think is we are expert Node.js guides that help organization in all this journey, and also we help developers. And we are the NO company. About NSolid and why we can use it. Well, as you know, with the time is very important for you, or the cost of the resources. So you need this type of app to monitoring the performance and the security of the app that you are doing in Node.js. So this is where Node.js has their own version of ONES. Our product achieves of 90% better performance than the competition. And as developers, we can share this information. So this is more than a marketing sentence. But with this year, about several weeks ago, we launched this app. This app is a tool. It's more than a tool than an app to monitoring or to compare the main NPMs, these tools that help us to monitoring our apps in Node.js, and to showing why NSolid is the highest performing observability solution. It is an open source, so you can review it, you can contribute, and you can see that this is not only a marketing lines or the speech. So we are in the market, and you can right now review this app because it's an open source. Now, what we are going to talk about, if you already listen, I was talking about keywords, and I write down these words in this slide: performance, node source, speed. And because we have our own version of Node, we were not sufficient. And I already talked about JavaScript, Node.js, platform, security, and applications. But this is important and is related with the design system. So please close your eyes and let's count from 1 to 5 to answer this question. What do you see when you listen design system? Probably you see a lot of components in your mind and some technological names associated with these components. And if you visit a library, You can see some libraries, components, etc. But what is this for real? I will tell you about it. This is a design vision, and the technical branch is a this definition of a design system is a library UX design pattern. And there are people that manage code and design. And in my case, as a designer, I have these skills, and I have also this technical knowledge percentage. And finally, with this infrastructure, because my team is aware of servers, full stack, and engineer very focused in the code. So a commonly agreed definition of a design system is a library of UX design patterns, rules, and guidelines that enables companies to ship and maintain consistent products at scale. So this is what we do. This means to create this only true source. Everyone can check it out. And why not? This is a more correct definition. And this is my proposal, is a coded decision collection. This means that in the same design, there is science, programming, because if we think about scalability and architecture and infrastructure, what we need is to be very fast and efficient. And this is what we have when we have a design system. So it's that sum or the adding of all the parts, and we can go deeper in this concept. We can understand, first of all, that when we are talking about this is something that is not so usual for us, but both professions are necessary in a team. And if I'm talking about a design system, there must be an agreement between both of them so everything will work. So we are creating an holistic vision of the product. And there is not only designers and developers, but we will have a very dedicated team that it can be designer for all the visual elements of the system, front-end developers to create modular and efficient code, experts, accessibility experts to ensure your system meets standards like WCAG, because if you don't not, this is very useful. And Java, and also the design and proposal that of the proposals that we have. You can Google all this. Also, content strategies who can help the team define the voice and tone of the system. Researcher who can help you understand customer needs. They are our clients. Performance experts who can ensure your system loads quickly on all devices. And as the engineers in my company, and also all of them, and these product managers also, to ensure that the system are aligned, and leader to advocate and align the vision across the company. So this means all for us and one for everybody. So it's very clear for all of us that this system decision are thinking in the speed and the growing, but everybody must be involved. So this means that the decision must be in a democracy, because like that we can achieve the speed that we need. And if we want to collaborate, they are open repository. So we can have a comments or the queue request if we want to talk in a technical words. So the design system will have a specific characteristic, accessible, with collaboration, and with a coherent vision. There are like three ways in this slide. And Curtis proposed that this design is not a project, it's a product by itself. And this is the source of this idea. And you can see three vision, and we can understand like this generation of the system. The first one is the just one person that will create the commits and the voice of the repository. The figure two is decentralized, is more than one person. And there's like a team that is in charge of creating the assets. And the figure three or proposal of how to structure our design system, and there are several people contributing, and all together it doesn't matter where they are, they have this design system. We work with a mixed design, so we have one person in charge of the repository, and we have several designers in this like the figure three. And first of all is to make a decision how we are going to work in this design system. This is a slide is proposed by Curtis in 2016, and he explained these three models. Now, the design system must have like a very basic things, and they are shared for all the platforms that we can have, even the web or mobile apps. So all the components and tokens and patterns and all the defined uh, things, that all the system will not be independent but interconnected. So let's see. This is the first one, the design. In the root file, we create the code and all the files or documentation. Here are the three main components in the design system root. This implied that it's not only a design team responsibility. Everything must be connected. Also the code, the documentation and design. Also, this design system must be supported by the design equipment, not only the designer, but the committee or the board that is managing the system. Also, we need to have a defined interface to work with the engineering team. This means that it's like a translator between programs, Figma or Sketch before, or currently Figma is more used with these designers. And some years ago, Zeppelin was used for this code translation. But today, this has the possibility to have all this information and to create this link. On November, it was launched. So I believe that we can get rid of one tool, but you can keep it. So those decisions you will take it. So what about those tools? As I already mentioned two or three: Figma, Sketch, and Zeppelin. A very key question is that they told us how these three elements, how can they be saved? And I believe that this depends on the focus of the company. In outsource or the design is in Figma with a Zeppelin integration, and in November, as I told you, is there to be this repository and be translated to a code. Every project is different. However, to have the standards and the best practices, you can work in a more efficient and organized way. So again, this is a decision that the team made. The design system, these are the tokens or icons or colors. So the design tokens are very similar with the platform or some characteristics. And again, we are maintaining the coherence. And I would like to share this Gartner slide where we can have the tokens or the four constituents of a design system. assets and the pages and we also have all the code components, and we need to translate it to another language that all the tech team can handle, or HTML, or some standards or guidelines, or is that documentation area that is very needed. And the concept of design tokens, to continue with this first part, is the minimum sense unit. And this concept was created with Gina A to talk about those very small entities. And that name is already known in the industry. It is not very known to identify these pieces. So according to the team, and they recommend it in terms of documentation, this is a Workday design. They say that these are very small pieces of the design system, and their main function is to storage information in the user interface, and this allowed the sustainable scale, while the coherence is assured, and also the platforms. So the token is an element that will not change and that require the adoption process, and is a very small piece, but must be very well structured from the beginning. And this is the essence. A token is also the raw material or the tool that we use to build more complex elements as components and patterns. And they are very linked with the atomic design system, which is a methodology. So as you can see, all these elements are the variants of the code. So design token is an agnostic technology. It doesn't matter what technology you are using or the language. These tokens, you can have it in a JSON, and always you can understand this to have a very defined stack. And because we are in a JS conference, this is the first thing to know. It's very important to understand that tokens and design must be agnostic, because must be possible to use for any support that we are going to use in a mobile app, web app, etc.
Multi-platform. So now this is an infographic taken from a YouTube video that I recommend a lot, which is Tokens as Superpowers, where I find really interesting that the design system is proposed as a distilled system. So first, the tokens are designed and they are agnostic, and then design components are designed, and this is the methodology of atomic design, where we can talk about atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, and pages. And when we think about components, design components, moving from the atom, these tokens are not variables, not code variables, but you can take them as protons, neutrons, and something beyond that, even if we just zoomed in the atom. So in the last stage, we have the developed components, where we have libraries and patterns, and there we have component catalogs. So this would be the atomic design methodology, which is widely known in the design world, I think in the developing world, in the development world as well. And here we go from the abstract to the specific. And here is the book so that you can look for it. If we talk about tokens, we are talking about protons, neutrons, etc. And then we go to the atom, which is the minimum unit. And then we go to the molecule, to the organism. The molecule will be a card in an application. The organism would be the array of cards. And when we talk about templates, now we're looking at that array in an interface. And when we look at a page, now we take it to a level of detail which is more precise, which is including images, colors, pictures, the selection of styles, typographies, buttons. So you can reach also features, how a button looks when it's pressed, and what's the hover state, or when you run it. So what's the criteria? The criteria to create this token, there are several ways to have it. If we only have one color, this methodology is from Envision app, another design app. And it proposes that if we have one color, we have a type of color. And if we're using it in a text, in a background, or in a border, and then it will be the type. So perhaps we are going to use it in an H1 or body tag, or if it's the background, we can use it for the button or for the header or for the table or a button. And then the sub item, and then the state. So whether it's active or it's hovered, or if it's primary or secondary. And in that way, we are generating the structure. This codification is done in SSOT, and the designers and the developers must agree in what a token is and how will this token be used. And if we are going to use it, how are we going to name them? And this agreement must be consistent from this first minimum design unit, so that every system is coherent. The best practice is to start simple. So first you create the tokens for the atomic properties and subatomic properties, which are most common in the design system, which are colors and textile properties, which are the main tools to begin to build the design system. And when we talk about assets, we're talking about user interface, which is more complex, or user interface units, which are more complex, which help us to create more components, which then are built with a function, a specific function or purpose, and that depends on tokens and the way they are built. So we will look about what kind of assets we will have. Some may be the libraries, the icon libraries, or brand assets, for example, the logo. And then we would have graphic libraries, for example, illustrations, animations, etc. So here now we have the part of the assets. Now, what are components? The level of complexity is rising, and here now we have to define the size and the design system that we're going to have. Normally in design systems, we have 3 complexity levels to define the components, where in level 1, we are generating independent components which are made only from tokens, and level 2, systems are built grouping level 1, that is components made out of tokens, with simple tokens or simple interactions. And in level 3, we have components built on some other components and logic metrics and interaction metrics. And due to this complexity, some people even decide within these design systems not calling them level 3 components due to their complexity, but they move them straight up to patterns, design patterns. So now when we talk about web components, those are these custom elements, the DOM templates, the DOM shadows, the HTML templates, and here you can find all the documentation. You can find the URL here in English, and if you change it to Spanish, you'll find the Spanish documentation, and it talks about what we can see that a web component is, and this is based on existing standards. Components are a specification which was given by the W3E, which are independent from custom elements. So custom elements we know are no longer approved since 2018, and now that is part of the HTML and DOM standards. So we moved this aside because the consistency was very hard. But custom elements, according to the W3E specifications, are a set of the API of JavaScript that allows us to define custom elements and the behavior that we can use to structure the user interface. So here, this has to do with the DOM shadows, with all this treatment of the elements of a tree, and how can we think about controlling these features that are associated to this, and how we can begin to hold these elements to create more consistency in our elements. So as I said, this is a topic that through time they realized that teams weren't using them. So they began to create more solutions, easier solutions, which are UI libraries. And here we have all these libraries that we know and that are heavily adapted and used by developers, such as React, Vue, Angular, which have this same purpose as web components. What this does is make front-end development possible based on components, and even though they are not native to web browsers, because you must add these libraries separately, while the others use the API that is already in the browser, they have a huge ecosystem. You know that there is a community made out of fans and developers, and why React or Vue is better, or Angular, and why everyone should develop in React. So here we have this ecosystem that is very well documented, and there are a lot of applications that have very cool characteristics. So it's natural that the companies use these UI libraries, trying to experiment with web components. These web components and these web standard components can be found in Mozilla, and they are an option for companies that want to take that level of detail also in design, if you have the resources to do that. What I recommend is that there are some resources that are very interesting, where you have already the buttons, the checkboxes for data tables or to pick or update. So these compilers of web components, which are very used by Apple, or for example, the Open Web Components Toolkit and all the verification lists that exist in these gold standards for web components, you can help following the best practices and how to build your design system. Remember that components are based in assets, and if we go back in this atomic design methodology, you can begin from the library, and if you want to ask what is going to be the consistency and how we are going to custom the experience around our brand, I would recommend you to zoom in and go back to all the way back to the tokens to define the tokens. And from there on, you can build the atoms, the molecules, the organisms, the templates, and the pages until you reach the complexity of the design system. So this screenshot I'm sharing is from the gallery that is created Carbon Design. If you can review it later. And finally, I am going to talk to you about patterns, which are harder to define. I know that you have patterns in your head, and when you thought about this system design, perhaps the analogy was there, but you don't know that it was there, and it's just starting to come up. The patterns are complex, so it is not very clear how they are formed. Patterns are more related as constructions, or instead of isolated elements. So they can be created and selected by the design system. And the rule is that they should be created and have some feedback by the people who solve the problems, because we have problems that where the insight reaches the client and the sales teams, and sometimes the product does not reflect that. From patterns, they already have the interaction, and the patterns consist in a reusable collection of components that are defined from these interactions because they solve a design problem. So they should have some constant feedback because the complexity of the problems implies listening to the customer, to the client, to the user, to the people who are in constant contact with the product, and all that feedback must reach the proposal. They are going to be included in the features and the engineering sprints. So the patterns must be adopted and documented as commercial cases, and they should be built as a set within the design system so that they can be solid and consistent, because we're talking about a higher level of complexity. We have some cases, reported cases in patterns, such as universal design systems, such as Carbon. And as we see in the image, they have achieved some understanding of patterns, and they have reviewed 14 patterns, and they explain their functionality for future implementation. So if you want to understand more these pattern concepts, you can have a guide here for 14 use cases because they are related to functionality and to how these patterns occur in design. As a design system and its architecture, what I like to propose is an initial implementation, what elements should be contained, and as a company, how we can give that first step to structure this first step. So what I propose here is that we first understand that the UI library is not the only source of truth, but that it should become the truth. And what does that mean? Because there we have the true operations of the UI components. So the more complex design systems may contain several libraries, such as native Android or iOS or web. But all these libraries also must be contained within my design system as the only source of truth. Now, it is important to generate this style guide, and we can have support in specific tools such as Fractal, Pattern Lab, and Storybook, where you can build a style guide, a real style guide, through the code of the library of the user interface. So this is an invitation so that you can begin to check these style guide generators according to the use case that you have. Another topic is the repositories and package administrators. These are specific tools about what tools we're going to use, if we're going to use NPM or Nexus, which are packaging all the libraries in the user interface. So we need to check which are the one we are using. And the repository of design tokens are those tools that help us manage and store and design tokens, which are included in GitHub or GitLab according to the decision that we have made in the version control of our project. Visual design systems and repositories are also worked through tools where designers use valuable assets through tools such as Figma and Adobe XD Cloud. But you must be clear about what tool and what repository you have, and this decision must be wide across the company so that designers do not waste time. And the trend right now is cloud, and this is an analogy to the trend, to the remote work trend that developers also have, to make pull requests, commits in GitHub or GitLab. And this is also happening in design. As we can see, we have design repositories where several designers can interact and they can branch out and create this pull request so that there is a merge of a change that is executed. So why is it important to implement a design system with everything that I have told you about? It's important because the value of the design system implies that there is an acceleration of the process because everything is centralized, organized, and determined. As you know, as I told you, these are codified decisions, so it allows us to scale faster. It is the only source of truth for designers and developers where they can check the information, and it avoids involuntary variations because if you deliver a graphic file in Sketch, what the designer is going to read is design as you would read code, but interpreting that design is different. So the rules are not set, and if you only have a design file and there is no documentation, then you can't replicate it, and perhaps it would be involuntary variations and brand inconsistency. And it can lead to a better user experience because, as I told you, we are thinking about experience for each of the interfaces, whether it's mobile, and within mobile, it can be native for Android or iOS. And if we're talking about another, such as Floater, we can understand what is the mobile experience of the user versus the experience in a desktop computer. And if you want to know more, I would like to share this in a page that shares all these design systems from large companies. And this repository from design companies is important so that you can begin to have this consciousness of development and why it is important to have this documented. There is Polaris, Shopify, and this is short for some implementations. And while it's widely used, I, as a designer, I love material design, but I would recommend you to check some other good practices from the people from all that are here. And for example, which is an open source project that you can check. There's the code, and it's very advanced for React. Fluid from Microsoft, Carbon Design Systems, and among others. So all of those, you can check them in this website.
This is like the end of my topic, and I would like to invite you that if you have any question, basically this is the end of my topic, but if there are some question, please reach me and through my social media, Twitter, and I can answer all my handle is Marian Villa, and I can answer all your questions. Thank you very much.